Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. This morning is Shabbat Hagadol, the big Shabbos. There's 2 pages going around. One which we've done many times before, but in case you haven't seen it, I printed a few more, called Rabbi Feinstein's Official 10 Tips for a Better Seder. And on the other side is called the Haggadah's Missing Page. And I'll do that in just a second. The other is a page of Midrashim that we are going to do today, and we're going to need the Chumashim today. Okay? So today is Shabbat HaGadol. Today is the Shabbos immediately preceding Passover. The tradition is that on this Shabbat, we spend some time meditating, preparing for Passover before you start tearing your kitchen apart and cooking a meal for all the relatives you can't stand. Today's the day when the rabbi is supposed to give you the lecture on what's kosher and not kosher for Passover this year. So many of you have seen and written to me and asked me about the conservative movement's new tshuva. The conservative movement, God bless them with long years, has written a tshuva. They've bolted into the 18th century. I'm so proud of my movement. The question is the following question. On Passover, one is forbidden to eat grains that have been fermented. Grains that have been or could be fermented are called chametz. Food that is made of such grains are interdicted, are prohibited. So you're supposed to clean them out of your kitchen. The rule is bal yireh bal yimatzeh. It shouldn't even be in your kitchen. So you clean these out, you cover the shelves, you kosher the pots and pans, or you bring in new pots and pans and dishes, and that becomes the rule of Passover, okay? Then there is a whole category of stuff which are not chametz, but might be mixed up for chametz. Mostly they include legumes. Plus, there are various grain products like rice and corn, which were unknown to the rabbis of the Talmud and certainly unknown to the Bible. And so the question is that when the Bible prohibits the consumption of the 7 grains that were found in the Middle East, and they include wheat, oats, rye, barley, spelt, and millet. Did I get 7? There's 7 of them. Does that also include corn, which is called maize, which is a North American vegetable, and rice, which you find in Chinese restaurants? So they're concerned, and what the rabbis, especially Ashkenazic rabbis, if you ever have a halachic question, don't ask an Ashkenazic rabbi. An Ashkenazic rabbi will say no. What was the question again? A Sephardic rabbi will listen to you and consider what the conditions are. Always go to a Sephardic rabbi. But the Ashkenazic rabbinate said no to everything. No grains, nothing that looks like a grain, nothing that even begins with the letter G, no legumes, beans, peas. No. There was one rabbi. Remember Jerry Danzig? Yes. He's a dear friend, a teacher. His great-grandfather, the Rav Danzig, was a great Vilna rabbi, a colleague of the Vilna Gaon. He even prohibited potatoes because potatoes can ferment and you might mix up fermented. Now, the Vilna Gaon wrote him a letter. And Danzig's grandfather wrote a very important halachic book, and he called it Chaye Adam, which means the life of a human being. And the Vilna Gaon wrote him a very snarky letter, where he says, you call yourself the Chaye Adam, you call yourself the life of mankind, or your book. And you said kartoffeln, potatoes are chumetz, are kitniot, they're chumetz. I think kartoffeln are Adam, and you are chumetz. Because if you take potatoes out of the diet of Eastern European Jews, they starve to death, right? So that's what, by the way, that's where rice comes in, right? Sephardic rabbis did a marvelous thing. You know that our Catholic brothers and sisters across the street on every Sunday morning perform a marvelous rite called transubstantiation, in which the priest gives you a little sip of wine and a cracker, and it is marvelously turned into the body and blood of Christ. Well, it turns out that Sephardic rabbis can do the same thing. Rice, which is a grain, which behaves like a grain, has the chemistry of a grain, grows like a grain, does everything a grain does. On Pesach, the Sephardic rabbinate turns rice into a vegetable. Marvelous, absolutely marvelous. And then the day after Pesach, it becomes rice again. I love this. It's transubstantiation because rice is a grain, but the Sephardic rabbinate said you take rice out of the diet of Persian Jews, they'll starve to death, right? So rice becomes a vegetable for 8 days. So now what happened? So legumes, beans, peas, etc., are not chametz, but sometimes they could be mixed up for chametz because a grain of a soybean might be mixed up for an oat. You see? And you could get mixed up. So the Ashkenazic rabbis 200, 300, 400 years ago said no legumes, except if they're not in their original form. Okay, so if you take a legume and you smash it, you end up with soybean oil, which is okay, but not soybeans. Okay, now, the rabbis of the conservative movement, wise and deep as they are, studied this problem deeply. Come on in. We got room. We got plenty. Come in, Jen. Come in, get a place to sit. Come on. They studied this problem deeply, and after many years of contemplative, deep meditation and study, they have come out to say, kitniot, legumes, are okay for Pesach. You're not going to make the mistake of mixing them up. And they did this for 3 reasons. One is because it was on very shaky grounds that they were prohibited to begin with. 2, we have a lot of vegans and vegetarians now in our community, and if you take tofu out of their diet, they'll starve. And 3, because it's expensive enough to make Pesach, why make it more difficult and expensive? Let's make it easier. So the best line in the tshuva was in the whole drama. You guys want to come in? Elliot Dorff, my dear teacher and revered scholar, who is the chairman of the law committee of the conservative movement. He's the chairman of the committee that makes these decisions. Gave an interview to the Jewish Journal. And he said, yes, scholarly wisdom teaches us that these things are allowable, but my wife will not let them in the house on Pesach. Right? Which reminds us of a great story. There's a famous story about Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik, who was the chief rabbi of Yeshiva University and the greatest Talmudist of the 20th century. Rav Soloveitchik once walked into the kitchen while his wife was preparing for Pesach and said, according to the law, you don't have to do that, and you don't have to do that, and you don't have to do that. And she said, get out of my kitchen, you chumetz it up, right? What do you know? What do you know, right? So, and the reason why this is important is because practice counts. I mean, the way you do something counts. So the truth of the matter is, if you have a lenient custom, you are now permitted, according to the conservative movement, to eat beans, peas, peanuts you eat anyway, soybeans, this kind of stuff, and rice is now okay for Ashkenazim. Right? Rice used to be fine if you married a Sephardic Jew, which is why I begged my son to marry a Persian girl. Begged him, please. Schmuck. No, I love my daughter-in-law. She's marvelous. She's marvelous. And then the other one's dating a really nice girl, but they're both Ashkenazim. So what am I going to do? Corn. I mean, they said corn is okay. I don't understand that. I looked at the tshuva. I get it. I don't understand it because corn is a North American grass. It's a North American grain. It seems to me that. So I mean, I'm not going to change the way I do Pesach. I sort of like the way I do Pesach. Other people might change the way they do Pesach. Yes, it's true. You can now eat all this junk. Okay. There you go. Yeah. Yes, but it's made out of wheat that's been harvested, and from the moment it was harvested until the moment it's baked, it's been watched carefully to make sure that it comes into contact with no moisture. My dad is a baker, and so he taught me once the biochemistry of this stuff, okay? On 1 foot, here's what we get. A grain is a vegetable with a high degree of sugar. Certain carbohydrates, carbon-hydrogen combinations, okay? Those sugars are locked into starches. Starches are sugars locked up into certain kinds of complex molecules, okay? When you get grain wet, the starches open up and the sugars become exposed to the air. In the air are yeast cells. You can't see them, but they're all around us, which is why stuff ferments if you just leave it out, okay? Because the sugars in the grain open up, and yeast love sugar. And when yeast come to sugar, they have a party. And when they have a party, they mate with each other, and we get little baby yeasts, right? And when a yeast cell divides, two things are, besides getting more yeast, you get a drop of, you get two byproducts. One is carbon dioxide, and the other is alcohol. Okay? So if you take a bowl of grain, take a bowl of flour, put it on the countertop, get it wet, leave it there for an hour, you'll smell yeast in an hour. Because there's yeast in the air, it finds its way to the grain. The grain, that's called fermentation. Okay? Everybody got that? Yeah. Now, for the carbon dioxide gets into the grain, and that's how you get leavened bread. You also get beer that way, right? If you're doing barley. Now, what they do for matzah is they take the matzah, so you watch the grain to make sure that it never came into contact with water, so the starches are still locked up. And then you set a time clock for 18 minutes, or 17 minutes and 59 seconds. You have 17 minutes and 59 seconds to wet the grain, knead the grain, mold the grain, lay it out on a baking sheet, and throw it into an oven at 1500 degrees. Okay? If you can do that in 17 minutes and 59 seconds, you have matzah. If it becomes 18 seconds, you have ugly salt crackers. 18 minutes, you have ugly crackers, you have tasteless crackers. Does that make some sense? So matzah is simply grain that has not been fermented in the 18 minutes it takes for the grains to have a party. Okay? That's matzah, okay? Legumes, however, have a very different chemical makeup. Legumes have a high degree of nitrogen, which is why if you combine legumes and certain grains, you end up with full amino acids, and that's why you can have a vegetarian diet. Okay, when I was in college, we all follow the diet for a small planet, which is legumes and grains, okay? Legumes are not grains because they don't ferment in the same way because they have the high degree of nitrogen, and therefore they're really not chametz, but because they look like chametz, we made them chametz up until last week when the conservative movement unchametzed them. Freed them for Jews to eat this week. So have a lovely week. Okay. Do you guys want to come in? There might be a little more room. If you want to come in, there's a room, there's some seats, there's some Jews with laps. We're happy Jews here. All right, a couple, yes, question. Yes.
I'm not a dietitian, but rice is not considered a gluten grain.
Yes, right. I'm telling you, rice is a grain, except it is the staple of the Sephardic community. So your rabbis, way, way, way back, the great rabbis of the East, as I said, performed this magical trick. It's a grain, it's a grain, it's a grain. Erev Pesach, it's a vegetable! It's like asparagus.
So the gluten has nothing to do.
It has to do with the carbohydrates that are in it. It's a grass, it's the seed of a grass that has a high function of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are starches that have sugars locked up into them. But you don't have to worry about this. You can gloat. So functionally, the difference is the fine. For those of you who if you want a mnemonic for this, it's really simple. Sephardic Jews eat sushi on Pesach. Ashkenazim eat sashimi. I think we're going to use wasabi for maror this year. This is in recognition of the fact we're a Pacific Rim Jewish community, and I think it's very, very, very wonderful. Yes, Your Honor. No. You kidding? The chief rabbinate, they never say yes to anything. Come on in. The chief rabbinate, we have a seat right here in the front. The chief rabbinate in Israel, both Ashkenazic and Sephardic are very, very tight about changing it. Look, I mean, we can go into some long conversation about this. I was asked about this week. You know, that segment of the community, which is very traditional, it's not orthodoxy, because sit right here. There's elements of orthodoxy which are different, but this is a segment of the community which is terrified of modernity and has erected very high walls to protect themselves from modernity. And any evidence, any whiff of change drives them nuts, because for them, any whiff of change is a dilution of what they consider Torah true Judaism, and therefore a dilution of the protection that they've built against modernity in the world. And that's an unfortunate thing. I mean, that really is the definition of that element. And it's not orthodoxy, because, you know, there's modern orthodoxy, There's open Orthodoxy. I mean, if you go to, there are many Orthodox communities that are doing amazingly new things, and remarkably new things. But there's an element in our community, alas, that's still very much afraid of change and afraid of modernity, and that's the walls that they've built. So let's stop with that. That's a whole nother lecture. Really quickly, this is something that I've done many times before, and I just want to spend too much time on it, but the sheet that I passed out, it has two sides. This is online. If you want to go look, if you go on the VBS website, there's a whole Passover kit there. Okay, really quickly, Rabbi Feinstein's official 10 tips for a better Seder. I should do this from 10 down to 1, like David Letterman. My brother-in-law, Ricky, used to come to the Seder, and he was very anxious, very obnoxious, very difficult. And it took me a long time, and one day I got mad at him. I mean, I love the guy, but I got mad at him. And I realized that the thing, when do we eat, when do we eat, when do we eat? So I went into the kitchen, and I got a wind-up kitchen clock. And I set it for 1 hour. And I set it in front of him, and I said, Ricky, it dings, we eat. He became tender and sweet. And I realized he's right. He's not wrong. I know the Haggadah very well. He doesn't. For him, this is endless. This is just endless. He just wants to know there's a time limit. So decide how long your Seder is going to be. Get a kitchen timer. I'm not kidding. Set it for that amount of time. Put it on the table and tell all your obnoxious relatives, it dings, we eat. Done. And it's really simple. When it's 5 minutes to the ding time, that's when you jump to the brachot at the end. So that way, if you get involved in a long digression, which is what Seders are about, you're not going to drive your relatives crazy. They know they're going to eat. And that works really well. My Seder, 1 hour. From candle lighting to dinner is 1 hour. 1 hour my relatives can sit through. If you have people with a longer attention span, gesundheit. If you have little kids at the table, make it 20 minutes. But people want to know when it's going to be over. I had this idea. I'm going to do this for high holiday services. I think people would come to shul if you knew that the high holiday service was going to end, right? So we'll put a kitchen clock on the rabbi's pulpit. It dings, we sing a Don Olam and go home. I think it's great, right? The most important part of Passover is to tell the story. Passover is about telling, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Passover is about telling a story. I don't understand the logic of people who want to get through the Seder. That's not the point of it. The point is to tell the story of our enslavement and our freedom and to discuss the implications of that. Okay? The whole purpose of Passover is to reenact the story. We were slaves in Egypt. This is the last night of our slavery. Our parents were slaves. Our grandparents were slaves. Their parents were slaves. We had no hope except that our children might have it a little easier than we did. This guy Moses showed up. He said, pack your things. We're leaving tomorrow. Tonight's the last night in slavery. What's that feel like? The exhilaration, the fear, the anticipation. That's the last night. So here we are to tell the story of the oppression of slavery and the gift of freedom. That's what we're doing at the Seder. Do it in any language you need to do it for the people at your table. If you have little kids, use sock puppets. Let my people go. No, no, no. If you have older kids, use sock puppets. Let my people go. No, no, no. Use movie clips. I get all the teenagers in the room to bring me a lyric from a song that deals with slavery and freedom. Turns out, Rabbeinu Kanye West. Guy knows something about slavery and freedom. We bring stuff because it involves the kid. Because it involves the kid and it is in him. In my family, everybody loves science fiction movies. So The Matrix is an important. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The Matrix, which asks the question: what if you're a slave and you don't know it? You know, these are really interesting. A friend of mine did a whole video Seder called "The Shankbone Redemption." You know, so, I mean, there's really possibilities here. So you use whatever idiom you need to use to tell the story, okay? I had a friend who said to us, we're going to act out the story. We're leaving home tonight. We're going on our journey to freedom. Dress in whatever you would dress if we were going to leave from the Seder to the airport. So everybody dressed in traveling clothes, and he said, bring a suitcase. And put in the suitcase, not your clothes or food, that's fine. What was one thing you would take from your home? If we were leaving tonight, never to come back to this house, and you could only take one thing with you. And people brought artifacts from their homes. They brought valuable things. They brought heirlooms. They brought books. And during the course of the Seder, the first thing he did is he got rid of all of the chairs, and we sat on our suitcases for the Seder. I had this hard Samsonite. So and then the second thing he did was he said to us, during the course of the Seder, open your suitcase and show us what you brought. And everybody shared this artifact which represented their journey. Because it's the journey of families, and that's what's precious. Tell the story. All right, quickly, here are 3-4 quick things. Make karpas salad. Parsley. Why? Nobody eats parsley, except people who eat at Denny's. There's no reason to eat parsley. Karpas is salad. You live in California, for God's sakes. Make a big tray of crunchy vegetables. Of carrots and celery and bell peppers and artichoke hearts and cucumbers and little tomatoes, and put them there. And why did we use salt water for dressing? To remember the tears of the slaves. Nonsense. Because we were poor and salt water was the only salad dressing we could afford. You can do better. Make a Pesach dick vinaigrette. Make guacamole, like our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Get some Pesach dick ranch dressing. Put it on the table. Pesach guacamole, and you put this big thing, and early in the Seder you make the bracha, Borei Priya Adama. Now Ricky, my brother-in-law, has something to eat. And during the Seder, he's fine. He's quiet because our mouthful of guacamole, Get it? Okay, fourth, people don't believe me, but my dad said, he's going to yell at me, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm an ordained rabbi. I graduated the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I have an honorary doctorate from the Jewish Theological Seminary. I know this stuff cold. Listen carefully. You don't have to drink Manischewitz. What? No, you don't. Again, so much of our custom has to do with poverty. When we were poor and lived on the Lower East Side of New York, the only grapes we could find to make wine out of for Pesach were Concord grapes that grow upstate New York. Concord grapes are bitter. In order to make wine out of them, you got to dump a lot of sugar into them. That's where Manischewitz came from. You can do better now. Chardonnay, right? Cabernet Sauvignon, So go out and get some good wine. There's good wine out there. You're supposed to drink 4 cups of wine. Why? Because the Seder's organized around 4 cups of wine. The Seder begins with a cup of wine at Kiddush. You tell the story of the Passover, and then you finish with a cup of wine toasting your freedom. You eat dinner with a glass of wine. You finish dinner, you have a glass of wine to say thank you to God for the gifts of our lives. You do the second half of the Seder, and the last glass of wine represents hope and the future. If you really like wine, do an aperitif, a white, a red, and a dessert wine. Then call Uber to get you home. Okay? But drink good wine. Don't drink, except for you, man. For you, I got Manischewitz. We bought a whole case of Manischewitz just for you. I'm drinking a nice California cab.
Actually, the best wine.
I know.
Shapiro's Extra Sweet Malaga.
Right. Shapiro's Winery on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It's in a basement underneath Eldridge Street. And the sign over it says, Shapiro's Wine. So sweet, you can cut it with a knife. That's really what it said. I mean, like Jews, why do you do this? The same reason we eat gefilte fish, You couldn't afford fish, so you stuffed it with bread. Invite questions. Don't be afraid of digressions. Seder's about digressions. It's about talking about freedom. So invite people to ask questions. In our Seder, you can stop any Seder at any time to ask a question. Now it's getting cold in here. What the hell is wrong with this thing? I don't understand this thing. It's good? You like it? Yes. All right. Half the group likes it, and half the group is a menopausal community. All right. We like to ask lots of questions. Sing songs. The Seder puts all the songs at the end. You don't have to do that. Move them to the beginning. And sing all the songs. Sing a Chad Miodea up to 15 or something. We do Chad Gadya with animal sounds. If you've had 4 cups of wine, this is a lot of fun. It's really simple. Chad Gadya, meh. Tehizabina babidrezuze, Chad Gadya. Then my brother-in-law will be the cat. This is a cat that eats goats, so it's Ve'ata shunra, ve'acha legadya, meh. I went to rabbinical school for 7 years. I had to learn animal sounds when I came here. And then you do, the dog is who let the dogs out. And we did it here at VBS once, and Brad Sherman, the congressman, played the angel of death. He sort of looks like, anyway, so the froggy song, lots of verses of Dayenu. Use a good Haggadah. If you're still stuck with Maxwell House, you can do much better. Go online. The VBS Haggadah you can buy in the gift shop for a few bucks, so you can download it. It's free online. Take it. It's a really good Haggadah. It's Rabbi Schulweiss's meditations on the Haggadah. Make the second night different than the first. Take a theme, do it differently. Just have something different. Or pick up where you left off. That's the other way to do it. Get to the second half. I was 17 years old before I realized that the Seder didn't end when all the men unbuckled their belts and fell asleep. Right? The way the Seder works out is the first half of the Seder, everything till dinner, is about the Pesach that was, about the Exodus from Egypt. Everything from dinner to the end is about the Pesach that will be, the liberation of humanity from slavery. So it's all about Jewish dreams. That's why you open Elijah's door at the end, because you're inviting Elijah into the room. Elijah is the precursor of Messiah. You're inviting redemption for the world into your home. It's a very powerful idea of dreams. Okay, and prepare. Take a few minutes to prepare. Preparing means think about what kind of memories you want to create. You're creating moments, you're creating memories. And that's why this is terribly important. Now, there's lots of other things. Invite guests is always a great thing. Eat something different than you ate last year. So turn the page over really quick. Ronnie, what was your question?
In our Seder, we sing Beatles songs.
Beatles songs are great. Right. Okay. We've done, I mean, you can do lots of fun things. You can get all kinds of things involved. And these make the Seder, you're trying to create a memorable moment. Yes, please, yeah.
Just an idea for the angel of death.
Yeah.
Make America great again.
Are you trying to drag me into a political discussion? I try so hard to eschew politics here, and I keep getting dragged into politics, right? I don't know why you would do that to me, Douglas. Okay, there's a question. The Seder is answer to a question, right? The way the Seder is structured, you all have a Seder plate, right? You got 8 of them on your wedding, right? When Nina and I got married, we got walks and Seder plates. People figure, oh, a rabbi's marrying a rabbi. What do we get him? You know. So, and the Seder plate has all the ritual foods. If you want to understand the Seder as it was created by the rabbis in the first century, you have to understand this very simply. You have to go eat dinner in an Arabic, Turkish, or Persian restaurant, because then you'll understand the whole thing. Here's how it works. When you go to an Arabic, Turkish, or Persian restaurant, where do you sit? Not quite. You see, in ancient times, we didn't have chairs and tables. What we did was we kneeled. You would kneel down like this to eat a meal, because there wasn't much food anyway. But people who had time, that's rich people who had time, who had lots of food and were not in a hurry, people who had time would lean on pillows. So leaning on a pillow, that's you lay on a pillow. Now the interesting thing about laying on a pillow is you only eat with one hand. So you slow down your eating by a half. And that's misubin. That's the posture of the Seder. Now, if you're eating in an Arabic, Turkish, or Persian restaurant, how is the meal served? A lady with an extraordinarily lovely belly button comes into the room with a large metal tray. On that metal tray is a mound of grain. On top of the grain is the meat that you ordered, so the juices go through the grain. And around it are small dishes with condiments. Savory condiments, sweet, sour, all kinds of spicy things, right? How do you eat this mess? You don't with your hands, that's gauche. If it's an Arabic restaurant, it's pita. If it's a Moroccan restaurant, it's French bread. If it's a Turkish restaurant, it's lavash. You take a piece of bread, you tear the bread, you make a scooper out of it, you scoop the grain, take a piece of meat, and dip it in one of the condiments, and you eat it. That's how we ate meals. The Seder plate was dinner. The Seder plate was dinner. There was a mound of grain. On top of it was roast lamb. In days of the Holy Temple, the lamb was sacrificed in the temple, wrapped in tinfoil, then brought back to your tent where you served it to your family. After the temple was destroyed, for 1,000 years, we ate roast lamb on Pesach. In the year 1100, the rabbis changed the rules completely opposite and said we eat anything but roast lamb. But it was grain with roast lamb, and around it are the condiments. Bitter condiments like maror, sweet condiments like charoset, savory condiments, all around condiments. Now, how do you eat this stuff? With matzah. Now, that's going to be kind of tough, you know. You take a piece of matzah, you try to get a scoop of it, it sort of breaks. So the kid says, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why is tonight different than all other nights? Why are we eating with matzah? Why is it only roast lamb? Why is it only bitter vegetables? And the biggest question of all is, All the time you grown-ups tell me not to play with the food. Tonight you're playing with the food. What's going on? And you say to the kid, come here, kid, I got to tell you something. You think that we're suburban Americans? You are somebody, you don't know who you really are. It's like taking the kid into the basement and telling him, like we're Russian spies. We are somebody, you have a history you don't know. Let me tell you your history. That's sort of the logic of the Seder. The kid asks the question, and we're here to give him the answer. And the answer is, you are not suburban American. We are refugees from Egypt, right? And we've been running ever since. And that's the sort of logic of the Seder. Now, the kid asks the question, and we tell him who we are. It's an answer to the Mishnah's idea that everybody has to say, I was in Egypt and I got redeemed. Here's the question that's not answered in the Seder. How come? Why? Why are you doing this? Why is this so important to us? Why does this matter? So when I have a question that big, I go ask Rabbi Schulweis. Right? Many years ago, he was busy, so the second best place to go is my computer. And I have a disk on the computer that gives me all the Jewish books ever published. So I looked in the Bible, and I said, how many commandments of the Bible are given to me because you're a slave in the land of Egypt? Here's the list. There's more than this, but this is a bunch of them. When you put this list together and you read it together, you get an overview of who we are. This experience of slavery and the experience of redemption is the experience that shapes us. It shapes our social ethics. It shapes our sense of identity. It shapes our sense of self. It shapes our relationship with money. It shapes our whole vision of who and what we are in the world. And you would that's not explained in the Haggadah. The Haggadah assumes you knew that already, but we don't. So I put this into the Haggadah. You'll find this in the VBS Haggadah. And what I suggest that you do is take a moment and read through these at your Seder, and what does it mean? I'll give you just one. Can we just take one? So after we leave Egypt, we cross the Red Sea, we get to Mount Sinai, God gives us the 10 commandments, and then you turn the page in the Torah, and God gives us a bucket of commandments. Mishpatim. This is one of them. You will not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You'll not ill-treat any widow or orphan. Stranger, widow, orphan. What do they have in common? They're powerless. They are vulnerable. The stranger is vulnerable because the stranger has no redress to grievance. The stranger can't go to court. The illegal alien can't go to court, right? Widow in a patriarchal society has no husband to protect or provide for her. Orphan has no father to protect or provide for him. Stranger, widow, orphan are helpless. If you do take advantage of them, they can't do anything about it. They have no power. There is a dissymmetry of power here between your power and their power. And if you wanted to oppress them, you could, and you could get away with it. Torah says you don't. You don't. I told this story the other day. Why not? So I got a member of the shul came to see me with her maid. You know, like lots of Jewish families in the area have women who work in their homes who come from Central America. So Rosa comes from El Salvador, has been in this family for 10 years, right? So I speak enough Spanish to understand what she's saying. So Rosa tells me, I have a friend, Maria, who just came from El Salvador and is working for a Jewish family. She's been there 6 weeks, and they haven't paid her. And she's asked many times to be paid because the reason she's here is to send the money back to El Salvador where her husband is raising the kids. And that was the arrangement. And she can make a lot more money here than there. So she's here cleaning toilets and making beds and making meals and putting kids to bed. And the family hasn't paid her for 6 weeks. And 6 weeks she keeps asking. And Rosa, the woman sitting in front of me, looks at me and she says, Rabbi, Señor Rabino, they are Hebreos. Hebreos don't do this. Hebreos aren't like this. 10 years I'm working for a family, Hebreos. I know what kind of people Hebreos are. Hebreos have corazon. They have heart. Don't these people know that they are Hebreos? Look at the question. Don't they know that they are Hebreos? Right, and all of a sudden, I'm so embarrassed, you know? Don't they know that they are Hebreos? And Hebreos don't do this. So I pick up the phone. I happen to know the guy, not a member of the shul. And it will never be a member of the shul. I call the guy in his office, and I say, I got to talk to so-and-so. And if I call, I say, Rabbi Feinstein's on the phone. I need to talk to him now. Whoop, right through, right? The guy says, Rabbi, what's the problem? There's somebody working in your house hasn't been paid. I know it's an oversight. I give him a little face saving. But it needs to happen. Oh, I'm sorry. She got paid. She left that house. She found another house. She's very happy. Hebreos don't do this. Why don't Hebreos do this? Now, you could say it's just wrong, which is true. And you could say that it's just cruel, which is true. But the Torah understands something, that knowing an ethic is different than observing an ethic. That if I really want you to observe an ethic, I have to root it in something more than simply an abstract moral principle. So what does the Torah root the ethic in? You are her. You were her. You are her. You know her heart. You were in that. You were a slave in Egypt. What was the condition of being a slave in Egypt? We're going to talk about this in a minute. Social invisibility. The slave is socially invisible, which means the reason why they didn't pay her is because she's invisible. She's just the Spanish lady who makes my beds and cleans my toilet. She's invisible. She doesn't count. She has no reality in my social perspective, and therefore I can treat her like dirt because she doesn't count. And the Torah says, you remember what that was like. Remember the movie The Help? Yeah. Great movie. I mean, this is a good Pesach movie, by the way, about African-American maids working in American homes in the South in the 60s. Remember that story? The kid goes to college, she comes back, they fired her. And she's like, where is she? She raised me? Well, I didn't need her anymore. Like, and then the other movie that came out exactly the same time was the movie The Butler. You know, Reagan's in his office talking about why he opposes sanctions for South Africa, and the African-American guy is there like serving coffee, and he's invisible to them. Social invisibility. Now, why are you not permitted to relegate someone to social invisibility? Because you remember it. It's an ethic of empathy. And an ethic of empathy is rooted in memory. So you need to turn historical experience into personal memory. That's what the Seder's about. That's the beginning of a social ethic. That's what the whole Seder's about. So take this home, put this in your Haggadah. Now you can read this, okay? All right, that's my suggestion for a Seder. All right, any Seder questions before we get on to the real stuff today? That was Vorspeise. That was Karpas. Yes, please. B'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. You know what the wonderful thing about that is? We said it twice a year, Pesach and Yom Kippur, for 1,800 years, but never went. Why didn't we go? Because for 1,800 years, Yerushalayim wasn't a place. Yerushalayim was a state of being. It meant a redeemed world. A world redeemed, right? And then here's one of the great ironies of history. There was this Jew, you know, who knew very little Judaism. His name was Theodor Herzl. He knew so little Judaism that he didn't know that Jerusalem is a state of being and not a place. The schmuck thought it was a real place. And so when he got to Shana Haba b'Yerushalayim, he said, why not? Why can't we really move there? And everybody in the Jewish world said, because it's not a real place. And he opened a map, an atlas, and said, look, it's right here. It's a real place. Zionism was created by people who didn't know better. Right? Do you understand? This is exactly that. So Shana Haba b'Yerushalayim in the mind of the tradition meant a world redeemed. So that the Pesach story will have its final culmination in a world that's redeemed from slavery. Zionism, Herzl said, no, it's a real place. You can actually go. Anyone ever been to Israel during Pesach? It's really very lovely. It's really very expensive. You can't get a hotel room, right? But that's why Jesus had to have the Last Supper in that crappy place, in that convent. He couldn't get a room in a hotel. And he went to the King David. He went to the Citadel. He went to the Waldorf. They said, get out of here. I mean, he walked up to the counter and said, it's me and my 12 friends. And they said, yeah, go. So I went to sleep in the garden, and that's it. All right, so let's take a look. Everybody got Chumash ready? We're going to learn a little Torah. Yeah? Everybody good? All right, if you're turn to page 410. Page 410. Page, if you don't have one, just share with someone cute. Page 410. 410, 410, 410. Okay, everybody good? Yay, 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 yay. Yay. What's up? What? Okay, ready? Marty, okay? You got one? Is there one around? I don't know if there's one around. Okay, look at the last line on page 410. This is the Song of the Sea. This is, I don't know how many of you like to read the last line of a novel, or you wonder how the movie ends. I'm going to show you how the movie ends. This is the last line of the story. The last line of the story. We cross the Red Sea. We arrive to the other side. We break out into song. Here's the last line just before the credits roll. No Egyptians were harmed in the making of this. Just before the credits roll, the last line of the movie is verse 18. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. God reigns, God rules the world forever and ever. What does that line mean? Here's what, the whole Pesach narrative is an answer to the question, oh my God, what just happened? Oh my God, what just happened? This is a group of people who went through an experience so profound. And then when the experience was over, you ever have this moment? You have this powerful experience, and then, you know, like you get to bed that night and you're lying in bed, you can't get to sleep because it was too powerful, and you ask yourself, oh my God, what just happened? What just happened? What just happened was we suddenly understood how history is put together. We suddenly understood how the events of life fit together as one. We suddenly understood that there's a pattern there. Remember when we were little kids and you had a puzzle, and the puzzle, you had all these dots? And the idea was to connect all the dots and make a picture. Remember those puzzles? And if you're really good, you could figure out how the dots are connected, and suddenly all these disparate dots that once just covered the page in a random way, now they reveal to you a pattern. They reveal a picture. And there's a the Gestalt moment, where you saw the dots and they just looked random, but now that you've connected them, you see the picture. It's like a constellation where you connect the stars, and now you see the picture. Now you can never look at that set of dots again without seeing the picture. Because once you see the pattern, the Gestalt, the way it's all put together, now it's so clear to you. And you grab somebody and you say, look, and all they see is dots. And you say, why can't you see the pattern? Because they can't see what you see. You see the connection among them. All they see is a bunch of dots. Seeing is a way of ordering the universe. The whole narrative of Pesach is about seeing, about what you see. And the end of the narrative is, now we get it. Now we see the pattern. We see that the events of our history are not random, and that the events of our history are not simply the result of random impersonal forces of global economics or global power. We see that the events of our history are not simply the result of human impulses and reflexes. We see that there is a reality just behind, around, within the events of our experience, and now we see the pattern. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. My God, I see it now. I see it now. And if you're a Jew who's living 500 years later in the time of King David, and King David has formed an empire, the first Jewish empire, with a capital in Jerusalem, you say, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. I see the pattern. I see it at work in King David's time. And I tell the Passover story because that's the moment when I first discovered the pattern, and now I understand where I am now. And if you're a Jew living 400 years after King David, and you're in Babylon by the waters of Babylon, and you sit and you're weeping because your temple is destroyed, and your city is destroyed, and your king is destroyed, and you don't know where you are in a universe of empire, you say, I still believe that the pattern holds, and somehow this will one day make sense to me. Right now, I seem to be off the map, but I have faith that I will one day see the bigger pattern. Because if I could see the pattern at the Red Sea, if I could see the pattern after Egypt, I will find that here in Babylon, I am part of the same pattern. And if you're a Jew living in Roman times, in Jerusalem, when the Seder was being put together by the rabbis, why did they give us the Seder? Because they were living under brutal Roman oppression. Remember, the rabbis were being hunted by the Roman special police, by the Roman Gestapo. They were hunting these rabbis. And the rabbis holed up. You know that little cute story about their holed up in Bnei Brak and they spent all night discussing? They were hiding from the Gestapo. And the question was, is this part of the pattern too? Can this oppression, this sense of hopelessness, this sense of powerlessness, can this also be part of the pattern? And their faith was, yes. That's why they spent all night on the story. Yes, we're part of the pattern. But where are we in the story? Where are we in the pattern? We were part of the pattern. Don't give up. It is still there. It is a pattern that yields justice. It is a pattern that yields liberation. It is a pattern that ends up on the other side of the Red Sea, free, singing songs. At this moment, we are still slaves in Egypt, but we will be free by the end of the evening. And if you're a Jew in Auschwitz, after an exhausting day of slave labor, with the smell of death everywhere, the inmates in the Auschwitz concentration camp sat on the floor, took the meager rations of food that they had, said a prayer of asking God forgiveness that they're eating chametz, and performed a Seder. And the question was, are we still part of the pattern? Even here, are we part of the pattern? That pattern that yields justice, that pattern, that move from slavery to freedom, is that still the reality of the world? And if you're a Jew living in 21st century America with all of this, prosperity, freedom, security, with an Israel that is powerful and secure, but still haunted by memories of the Shoah, and you still say, where's the pattern now? How does it work now? Where am I in the story? Adonayim loch leolam va'ed. The God they're talking about is a God who lives beyond, within, around, above the events of history, and uses the events of history as indications of God's presence. Dots on the page, and we have to connect the dots and find the pattern. Most of us got to find where we are in the pattern. How am I part of this pattern too? That's the great question. The whole narrative of Pesach is a question about see. What do you learn how to see? A slave only sees right here, right now. Slaves look down. They don't even look up. It's a wonderful midrash that I tell kids all the time about two of my ancestors, Beryl and Shmerel, who crossed the Red Sea, and Beryl says to Shmerel, "Nu, what do you think of freedom?" He says, "Look, all I see is mud." And he said, "Yeah, we had mud in Egypt, And they got to Mount Sinai, and God shows up on Mount Sinai and says, "Here's the truth." And Shmerel says, "What do you think?" He says, "All they're doing is shouting instructions." He says, they shouted instructions in Egypt, and they get to this promised land. He said, "What do you think of the promised land?" He says, "The truth be told, my feet hurt. After 40 years, my feet hurt." He says, "You know what? Let's go back to Egypt." So they go back to Egypt. So to this day, they're still wandering, Because a slave only looks down. Slave only sees right here. The whole narrative is, how do I get you to look up and see where you really are? Adonayim loch leolam va'ed. Where am I really? That's the great question of Passover. David, yeah.
I was just going to ask.
Please.
That maybe there's an unwritten fifth question that's informed by this history.
Yeah.
Why does history always repeat itself?
Yeah, well, because the answer is Adonayim loch leolam va'ed. There's a God working in history, which to me means that there's a pattern to the dots. And that pattern is the pattern. Now, these guys have this enormous faith because of the experience they went through, that the pattern yields liberation and redemption at the end, and justice at the end. But it depends on where you are in the story, you know? Right? You're a great musician. You know great music, right? You know, if you're stuck in the second movement, life is really dark. You know, symphonies begin with great moments, hum, bum, bum, bum. But by the second movement, it's always. That's when I fall asleep at the Hollywood Bowl. You know, you have to wait till the fifth movement to come back up and sing the Ode to Joy, right? Right? But what if you're stuck in the second movement? You know, and he's like, Brahms. You know, man was so constipated. You know. You ever? I mean, Brahms. Don't you think Brahms is the guy? If this man had X-Lax, he would have written like Beethoven. He would have written like Bach. You know, Bach was a man who let it flow. We had like 14 kids, right?
22.
There you go. Someone said he couldn't find the organ stops. You know. But there's, I mean, you know, it's just you know, because, and what is it? You know, it's, you know, it's just make patterns, right? Music is all about patterns. All right, let's go back to the beginning. 3:17. We have another 2.5 hours. Come on. 3:17. Ready? Let's go back to the story. We'll take a few peeks at the story. Ready? This is the story you're going to tell Seder night. I'm sorry I'm going to feed you with, so we should have some food tonight. These are the sons of Israel who came down to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household. Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehudi, Issachar, Zvulun, Binyamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The total number of Jacob's Israel came to 70, Joseph being there already, 318. Top of the page. Ready? I'm going fast because my Seder goes fast. I have an hour. Joseph died and all of his brothers and all that generation. New chapter. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so the land was filled with them. Right? In Hebrew, Vayimat Yosef, V'kol echad v'kol adorahu, Uvnei Yisrael, and there are 5 verbs. Paru v'yishritzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu b'ma'od ma'od. 1, 2, 3, 4 verbs. 4 verbs. Paru v'yishritzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu. Now, there's if you know Hebrew, it's the second to the last line of the first paragraph. Pru urivu is the commandment, be fruitful and multiply. We have those 2 words, pru urivu. But next to them are 2 other words. V'yishritzu v'yatzmu. Pru urivu is the Bible words for, that would have been enough. You could have just said rabu, you could have just said pru urivu. Yishritzu and yatzmu, those are strange words. Yishritzu comes from the Hebrew word sheretz. What's a sheretz? It's a reptile, a bug. Swarmed. In other words, this isn't, if you were an Israelite, you would say, pru uravu, right? I go out here every morning, when I get depressed especially, and I stand in the nursery school and I play with my kids who are 2 and 3 years old, and I say, thank you God, pru uravu. But the Egyptians didn't see pru uravu. What do the Egyptians see? V'yishritzu v'yatzmu. They saw v'yishritzu. These Israelites, they're like all over the place, like bugs. Damn, wherever you go, there's Israelites. Whew, look at all those signs in Hebrew now. Ooh, I feel terrible. I feel uncomfortable. You know how you feel when there's bugs in your kitchen? You feel like, you know, there's an abhorrence, you know? That's Egyptians are looking at Israelites going, v'yatzmu. They became formidable. They became powerful. They became powerful. B'me'od me'od. What does me'od mean? What does me'od mean? Like lots very. Very, very. Right? Now, Vayakam melech hadash al Mitzrayim, a new king arose over Egypt. Asher lo yadat Yosef. He didn't know Joseph. Meaning what? He didn't know what?
The history.
The new king doesn't know the backstory. He doesn't know how we came to this land and saved it from starvation. He doesn't know he doesn't know that we owe this land in which we live our loyalty and our lives. He doesn't know how loyal we are. What does he see? Foreigners. How does he see us? We see ourselves as we came to Egypt, we've prospered, and we helped Egypt prosper. We see ourselves as pru urivu. What does the king of Egypt see? Yishritzu v'yatzmu. They came to this land, foreigners. They spread like bugs, and they became awfully powerful. He sees us differently than we see us because he doesn't know how we came to this place. He sees us differently. Now, one more piece. Joseph. What did Joseph do? Joseph was in prison, and he interpreted the dreams of the baker and the butler. And then when Pharaoh had a dream, remember the dream? 7 fat cows and 7 thin cows. If you saw the show, Andrew Lloyd Webber, it's the best scene in the show. It's the Elvis Presley scene, right? You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about, right? 7 fat cows and 7 thin cows, and the 7 thin cows ate the 7 fat cows. And he doesn't know what this dream, he knows it's a disturbing dream. He doesn't know what it means. So they go find this kid in the prison, this Jewish kid in the prison, and they bring him up and they clean him up and they stick him in front of Pharaoh, and the kid figures out the dream in a second. 7 good years, followed by 7 lean years that will erase the good years. Now, Pharaoh could have said, how does a politician, how does a leader respond to such a thing? He could have been angry, could have been fearful. What does Joseph give Pharaoh? He gives Pharaoh something that every leader wants most of all, a certain kind of leader wants. He gives him a policy. He gives him a policy, a rational policy. Build storage cities, collect the grain during the 7 good years, and then in the 7 lean years, you'll release the grain. He gives him a rational way to solve a problem. That was that Pharaoh. That was that Pharaoh. What about this Pharaoh? This Pharaoh, lo yadat Yosef. Not only does he not know the backstory and the history, he doesn't think in the same way. He doesn't think in rational terms. He's not looking for a rational policy. This is about the politics of fear. Vayakom melech hadash asher lo yadat Yosef. He doesn't know how to govern like Yosef governed. He doesn't know how to govern with rationality. Instead, he is driven by his fear. The king of Egypt, the most powerful man in the world, is afraid. He's afraid. Vayomer, and he says to Alamo, he says to his entire people, Hine am b'nei Yisrael rave atzum mimenu. They are too big and too powerful for us. The politics of fear. This is the politics of fear. He does not respond rationally the way Yosef would have. He responds from fear. And what happens when you have the politics of fear? Wait a second, Michael. Right? Hava nitchak malo. From the word chacham. Let's be wise about this. Let's deal shrewdly. In the event of war, they'll join our enemies and fight from the land. Pharaoh is afraid. I think Yul Brynner is a brilliant actor, a wonderful actor. I wish the guy would have had a T-shirt, though, because every movie it's the same. You're like, I have a magnificent chest. Don't I have a nice chest? I am the king of Siam. Whatever role he ever played, in the Magnificent Seven, he is the king of Siam. I am living in Arizona in 1870, but I am the king of Siam, right? And I am the ruler of Egypt. Yul Brynner. Yul Brynner's evil is not the evil of the Pharaoh, though. It's a bad casting decision. You know why? Because Yul Brynner is afraid of nothing. A man with that little hair, he has nothing to be afraid of. Nothing to be afraid of. I'm thinking a little man on a big throne. Danny DeVito. Jack Nicholson. A man who is driven by fear. A man who is afraid, the Prince of Egypt, actually, the cartoon got it better. A man who's afraid he'll never measure up to his father. A man who is trying to be bigger than he really is. What if they come and attack us? You own everything. You are the most powerful ruler in the. What are you afraid of? That's not the point. What are you afraid of isn't the point, you see? It doesn't matter how I'm not going to get political here. It doesn't matter that your military is 55 million times bigger than anybody else's. It doesn't matter that you're technologically 2 generations ahead of everybody else on the planet militarily. It doesn't matter that you can project power anywhere on the planet within minutes with indelible results. It doesn't matter. If you're afraid, they're all threats to you. And so what is his vision? What does he see? What does Pharaoh see? Threats everywhere. Threats everywhere. He's a little man trying to pretend he's big. Okay, Michael?
This sort of reminds me of the story of the court Jews.
Yeah.
In terms of Joseph. One of the only one, I think, of the early Jewish sages wrote that this is the result of Joseph's actions.
That's a whole interesting, that's a way, you can look back at the story of Joseph and how he enslaved the people of Egypt.
Yeah.
And that could be too.
Sold them back to
And sold them, yeah. He enslaved them. It's true. All right, let's go back. Ready? So you're Pharaoh and you're afraid. What are you going to do? 3 attempts at population control. Attempt number 1. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramses. But the more they oppressed, the more they increased and spread out. So the Egyptians came to dread them. V'kein yifrotz v'yakutzu mipnei bnei Yisrael. They were abhorrent. They became like bugs. It's more than that. How does a majority population, which has an indigenous minority, which has been there for a long time, how do you enslave them? How do you turn the majority against the minority? How do you turn the majority against the minority? If you're Joseph Goebbels, how do you do it? Jews live in Germany. Jews have lived in Germany for 700 years. For 700 years, Jews have been citizens of Germany. And because of Enlightenment, they were emancipated. They live in our cities. They teach our children in school. They're our business partners. We're married into them. You know what the intermarriage rate was in the 30s, in the 20s? They're married into our families. We have Jewish friends. We have Jewish business partners. Like Eichmann had Jewish neighbors that he had over to dinner. They played cards. Everybody has Jews. How do you turn, if you're Joseph Goebbels, how do you turn the majority against the minority? The first thing you do is what? The first thing is identify them. Them. Those people. Those people, and you put a box around them. Those people. Now, once you identify them, and by the way, if you can make it visible, it's even better. Give them something to wear that shows everybody who they are. Put signs on their stores. Those people. Then what's the next thing you do? You tell a story about them, which says, scapegoat them, you castigate them. They're the reason why you have trouble. They're the reason why, because you know why? They own all the banks. They're communists. You don't have to be consistent, by the way. They can own all the banks and they can be communists at the same time. Doesn't matter. No, seriously. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're the reason you have trouble. They're the problem. All right. First, identify, then castigate. What's the third step? What? Assign to them a metaphor. Use a metaphor that begins to change your vision of them so that you won't see them anymore as your neighbor's friends and sons-in-law and daughters-in-law. The two metaphors that Goebbels used was vermin. Vermin means bugs. If you have bugs in your kitchen, who do you call? An exterminator. The other one was cancer, a disease, a medical metaphor. And if you have cancer in you, you need a surgeon to cut it out. And you know it's going to hurt to cut it out. But that's the only way to save you. Because if I don't cut out the cancer, it's going to take you over and kill you. And now you're starting to change the perception of that group. They're not my neighbors. They're not my friends. They actually have a secret plan to take over my country, a secret plan to steal my wealth, a secret plan to steal my daughters. And now I see them in very different ways. We better build big walls, exterminate, send those people out of the country because they've come to steal. You know, they look like the people who've come to make your beds and clean your toilets and mow your lawn and dump your trash and fix your roof, but they're really a conspiracy coming to steal everything that's precious from you because they're not like you. And now we isolate them And once you've isolated them and succeeded in dehumanizing them, you can eliminate them with impunity. Right? That's what the words Vayakutsu mipnei bnei Yisrael. Pharaoh succeeded in making the Israelites look different in the eyes of the Egyptians. These are not our neighbors. These are not our friends. This is not the guy that fixes my roof. This is not the man who mows my lawn. This is a conspiracy coming to take what's precious to me and steal all that's mine and threatens me. I better respond. I better respond. It's about changing perceptions. Changing perceptions. Okay, one more. Ready? And they made them work beferach. And ruthlessly they made their lives bitter for them. Turn the page. Ready? But that's not going to work. There's still too many of them. So we're going to have to up the stakes. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. One of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, and he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. I want you to see. The boys are threats. The girls don't matter. The Egyptians are ours. The Israelites are not. Look at that baby. I don't want you to see baby. What do I want you to see? Enemy, alien, pestilence, threat, pollutant, contaminant. Drown it. Get rid of it. Take that baby and kill that baby. Don't see baby. See threat. But there's a problem when you're dealing with midwives. Frankly, there's a problem dealing with women. Women just don't get this. I don't know what the problem is with you guys, but women just don't get this. Don't you see that killing these children is the only way to save the society? What the heck is wrong with you? The whole story is about men's frustration getting women to join the policy of genocide. Because you women just won't sign on. You won't sign on. What the hell is wrong with you people? Don't you understand how important this is? It is the only way to make Egypt great again, is to get you to sign on. I just don't understand you. I just don't understand you. And here's the first time this phrase is used in the Bible. V'tirena hamiyodot eta Elohim, verse 17, because they fear God. Tirena doesn't mean fear. Tirena means to revere. Tirena means to respect. A midwife brings life into the world. A midwife learns to bring life into the world from her mother, who learned it from her mother, who learned it from her mother. A midwife knows how to do this. It's in her fingers. How to touch, how to manipulate, how to press, how to hold. A midwife is all about life-giving. You can't teach a person who is involved in life-giving to kill. The hands that bring life into the world refuse to kill. Refuse to kill. They respect a higher authority, as the hot dog people say. They revere a God of life. They revere life itself. For them, I can't sign on to this policy of killing children. I don't kill children. I bring children into the world. But the problem is, Pharaoh's killing people. How do you keep yourself from getting killed? So they go in front of Pharaoh. Pharaoh brings them in front, and Pharaoh says to them, right, the midwives fearing God did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said, why have you done this, letting the boys live? Why don't you see what I see? Why can't you see that these boys are a threat to us? Why can't you see these boy babies, these infant children as contaminants of our culture? Why do you insist on seeing them as pitiful babies? The hell is wrong with you? Because he sees this, but they can't see what he sees. Why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? And the midwife said to Pharaoh, and what they do now is so brilliant, they simply repeat back his own propaganda. Because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. It's unnatural, Pharaoh. They're not normal. Right? And the next line in Hebrew is, ki chayot heina. Now, ki chayot heina, our translator here says they are vigorous. What a horrible translation. Chayot, what's a vilda chaya? They're wild animals. They're like dogs. before the midwife comes, they have a litter, 6, 7, 12 babies. Gewalt. And now, what's Pharaoh going to do? He can't argue because that's his own propaganda, right? And the Torah says one more thing. The Torah adds the most beautiful little line here. It stops the narrative. That's the narrative. It stops. And it gives you a coda, an ending to this little vignette. Because if you think about it, the vignette of the midwives isn't necessary for the telling of the story. It was a failed attempt at partial genocide. So why include it in the story? Watch. Because the God dealt well with the midwives, the people multiplied and increased greatly, and because the midwives feared God, God established households for them. Batim. What does batim mean in Hebrew? It doesn't mean he gave them new kitchens. It doesn't mean he gave them new appliances. A bayit means a dynasty. It means children. They increased the children of God. And what did God give them? Lots of children. Which means what, ladies and gentlemen? It means the world is filled with the descendants of Shifra and Puah. They're around us all the time. They're not Jews, but they're around us all the time. And first of all, if you ever want to look at an Egyptian and say, you son of a bitch, what you did to my family, be careful. You might be talking to a descendant of one of them. But more than that, it means that the world is filled with people who fear God like we do. And they may not worship the way we do. They may not look like we do. They may not eat gefilte fish. But you know what? You have to find them and embrace them because they like you. Only reason you're in the world is because they had a sense of life and life's preciousness. The world is filled with their descendants. Please. That's the great question. So look at the Hebrew, the phrase. Look at the phrase. It's on page 320. It's the first line, right? Hamiyaldot ha'ivriot. Now, anyone here know a little Hebrew? There's two grammatical constructions in Hebrew. One is adjectival, and the other is smichut, right? Constructive. Adjectival means these were midwives who were Hebrew. Smichut means they were midwives who were Egyptians, but they did the office of midwife to Hebrews. Rashi and the Midrashic tradition likes number one. They say these were Jewish women. The problem is, how did Pharaoh think he would get Jewish women to kill Jewish babies? Now, you could say there were capos in the concentration camp, right? But that's one way to read it. I like to read it the other way. I think these are Egyptian women who were being midwives to Hebrew women because that's how integrated into the culture we were. Hang on, let me finish the point. And that the point of this narrative is to tell you that you're not the only God-fearing people in the world, and that you can't lord your own morality over other people, because there are moral heroes in the world, and the only reason you're still in the world is because Egypt had moral heroes. Or as Rabbi Showeiss would say, Egypt had rescuers. So there's two different ways to read it. Shlomo.
But if you read the next sentence, it makes sense that they're not Jewish, because it says, they compare that these women are not like the Egyptian women.
Yeah.
So you infer from that they're
It could be.
they're not Jewish.
You know, Rashi likes the other way. It's Showeiss against Rashi. Right? And in a contest between Showeiss and Rashi, I go with Showeiss for obvious reasons. Because Rashi never hired me for anything. So Showeiss put my kids through college. All right. Ready? Come on. Finally, genocide number 3. Come on. Genocide number 3. Look at verse 22. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you will throw to the Nile, and every girl that live. Who did this? Who did it? Who did it? No. Verse 22. Page 321, verse 22. All the people. Who did it? There's a wonderful scholar named Daniel Goldhagen at Harvard who has written astonishingly disturbing books. In Goldhagen's book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, he says, it wasn't Gestapo, SS, Luftwaffe. It was the policemen. It was the factory work. It was a project. The Holocaust was a project of the entire German nation. And in certain ways, the Holocaust was a project of all of Christian Europe. It's a very, very, very disturbing book. Right? The Bible says, genocide isn't just a class of soldiers don't do genocide. Everybody did genocide. This was a project of a whole society. This was a whole society either involved or complicit. Involved or complicit. Right? Involved or complicit. Okay? All right, now, one more. We have another 2 hours. Ready? I'm going to do this quickly. Ready? I'm suggesting to you that the whole narrative of Exodus is about vision. So we have Pharaoh's vision down, right? And now we know how Pharaoh taught Egypt to see the Israelites. How do the Israelites see? Take a look. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. Okay? Wait, stop a second. And I gave you a little midrash here. We don't have time to do the midrashim, but we'll just tell this. All around you is genocide. They're killing babies. What's the most powerful act of resistance? Get married and have a baby. Right? Right after the war, in the DP camps of Europe, the birth rate, just amazingly. Herschel Fox was born in a DP camp. You would imagine that people survived concentration camps, survived living in the forests of Europe, survived. They wouldn't want to have kids. On the contrary, having a child, bringing life into the world, was the most powerful resistance to Hitler. It's a resistance to Hitler. Right? So he goes and they go and have a kid, but the problem is the kid's born a boy, which means what? He's going to have problems. They're going to come look for him, right? Right? The woman conceived, V'tahar isha v'teled ben. She gives birth to a boy. V'tereh oto. She sees him. Look at the word. Look for any word that has to do with vision. She sees him. And the English says she saw how beautiful he was. And she hid him for 3 months. So let me ask you something. If he was a miskite, she would have thrown him into the Nile? I mean, what is it? What mother doesn't think her baby's the most beautiful child that's ever been born? Here, take him. He's a miskite. I don't want him. Come on. Look at the Hebrew. V'tereh oto ki tov hu. Mazeh ki tov. What is ki tov? Where does that come from? Genesis. That's cosmic good. Cosmic. This baby has Genesis in him. Ki tov hu. She hides him for 3 months. After 3 months, she can't hide him anymore. The practical reason is because he's making noise. That's not the real reason. If you can hide him 3 months, you can hide him 4 months. You can hide him 6 months. All the mothers in the room know exactly what she was going through. What were her nightmares? What were her nightmares? Yeah. Her nightmares were in the middle of the night, they'll break down the door, they'll pull the baby from my breast, they'll destroy him in front of my eyes. I can't live with it. I can't live with it. I can't live with it. One day she just loses it. She just loses. She can't live with it. Better to trust chaos with the baby than to have to witness the destruction of the baby. I don't want to see this. So she makes a teva. The only other place in the Hebrew Bible where the word teva is used is Noah's Ark. And she puts the baby in the teva, in the wicker basket, verse 3, caulked it with bitumen, put the child in it. This is the Superman myth, right? She says goodbye to her baby. Can you, I mean, what you got to do when you tell this story is you got to stop and feel. Can you imagine this woman? What does she feel? How does a mama put a baby in a basket and float him down a river? But she can't live with it. She can't live with the prospect. She's torn. This is her child. But she doesn't want to see what's coming. So she floats it down the river. The sister, however, I told you, the women just don't get this thing. The sister says, I'm going to go see. I'm going to go find out what happens to the kid. I'll go look. I'll see. The sister's plucky. This is that kid in To Kill a Mockingbird. What's her name? Scout. That's it, Scout. And she goes to Scout, right? That's what the sister does. I will go see what happens to him. Her name is Scout. I like that. To Kill a Mockingbird. One more woman. This is the woman who I think is the great hero of the whole story. The daughter of Pharaoh. Hitler's daughter. The daughter who grows up in the household of the guy who's so motivated by fear that he turns his whole people into a genocidal machine. The man who taught Egypt to see babies as enemies and to destroy them with your hands. The daughter of this guy. She goes down bathing in the Nile. She goes down with her maidens. She goes down with her Secret Service detail. All these people around her, right? She sees the basket. She's the only one who sees the basket. The Secret Service doesn't see the basket. Well, that's what they're paid to do, by the way. The maidens don't see the basket. She's the only one who sees the basket. Isn't that interesting? So she sends a servant, bring me the basket, right? Now, if I'm holding a basket and there's a baby in it, am I going to know there's a baby in the basket? Sure. How am I going to know there's a baby in the basket? Right. If I'm holding, it should say, and she held the basket and heard the baby crying, so she opened the lid. That's what it should say, right? Isn't that what it should say? Yeah. Say yes. Yeah. Thank you. I feel better. Right? But it doesn't. It talks about seeing. When she opened it, she saw, stop a second, what does Pharaoh want her to see? What has Pharaoh told her to see? Vermin, cancer, threat, enemy, contaminant, pollutant, danger, conspiracy, devil child. That's what she's supposed to see. She opens the basket, and what does she see? It was a child. She sees a child. She sees baby. And the baby was crying. And she took pity on it. She took pity on it. Whatever maternal instinct is in her was awakened, and she takes pity on it. And in case you say, oh, she doesn't know it's a Hebrew baby, she says, this is a Hebrew baby. This is a Hebrew baby. Right? She knows right away who it is. Right? It's circumcised, maybe, but it's wrapped in a Jewish blanket. That was the movie, says it was. I don't know what a Jewish blanket looks like. It had a big Jewish star, Verves. The basket had a Lexus thing on the front. I don't know, Verves. If Jews didn't exist, I don't know what Lexus would do. It's a kid. She sees it's a baby and she holds the baby. What has she accomplished here? She has seen through the visual screen erected by her father. She sees not what the propaganda of the regime tells her to see. She sees baby. She sees baby. And so the sister says, you want me to go get a Hebrew nurse? And she says, yes. So she brings the mother. And now the two mothers come together and they make a pact. You nurse the kid, then bring him back and I'll raise him. So he's raised. And he gets a Jewish name, Moshe. Moshe in Egyptian means son of. Ramses, Ra-Masas. Son of Ra, Masas. Moshe means sonny boy. Right? Junior. His name is Junior. Right? Now, he grows up. One more thing. Look at verse 11. Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk, and what does he see? He's now Prince of Egypt. He sees slaves building Egypt. What is he supposed to see? Economic progress. Economic progress. A bigger and better Egypt being born. He saw and witnessed their labors. In Hebrew, it's vayar besivlotam. He sees their suffering. He doesn't see labor, he sees suffering. He doesn't see what he was taught to see. He's raised by two women with extraordinary eyes, and he sees suffering. He sees suffering. He doesn't see what he's supposed to see. And now, because it's hard to see it in the macro, you have to see it in the micro. The most famous book of the Holocaust is not a book which describes the plight of 6 million Jews or 11 million casualties of the Holocaust. It's the story of one 13-year-old girl hiding in an attic in Amsterdam. Because it's impossible to think of 6 million. But you can think of one little girl, Anna Frank, hiding in an attic in Amsterdam. So he goes and he sees it in the micro. Ready? Vayifen, right? Vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri. He sees ish mitzri, a man who is Egyptian, beating the life out of a man who is Hebrew. Ish mitzri makeh ish ivri. He doesn't see slave master beating slave. He doesn't see no one else would have even seen this. It's so normal. He sees two human beings engaged in a transaction in which one is beating the life out of the other. And he can't stand it. Me'echav, one of his own. He identifies with which one? With the slave. At that moment, when he identifies with the slave, Moses becomes a free man. He becomes a free man. He sees each man as a man, not as a social role, but as a man, and he identifies with the slave, and that becomes the day he sees himself in completely different ways. And at that moment, he becomes the liberator. At that moment, he becomes the hero of the story. It's all a question in what you're taught to see. And the whole story is about what we see. It's what do we see? What have we been taught to see? And what do we learn how to see? And how do we free ourselves from the screens that keep us from seeing what's there and to see where we are in the world and what we're expected to do? And then ultimately, how do you see the larger pattern of liberation, the larger pattern of the story which determines the course of your history? How do you see the larger course of the history? And where do you see yourself in that larger course of history? The Jewish people, this narrative is all about seeing, and the Jewish people came to understand that there is a God in history, which means that there is some pattern in history which leads to redemption and liberation. And what's called upon in your job, what you're called upon to do is to associate, to align yourself with that pattern and make it happen. It doesn't happen until you join and make it happen. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. You make it happen. You join as part of it. Seeing yourself as part of that larger pattern of history. That's what all of Passover is really about. Let's stop here. Wish everybody Hag Sameach.